Now that we've worked with our single variable data, what does this all mean? What can I tell from these graphs besides maybe the mean, median, and mode? So let's talk about shape and outliers. So the first thing with shape is generally our shape can be used based on our histogram. That's most what it's commonly referred to. You can see it in your stem plot, you can see it in your box plot, but I think it's personally, I believe that it's easier to see on my histogram. So we have what is called a normal distribution. A normal distribution is a bell curve. So it's directly in the middle. Okay, so looking at this, most of my data falls in the middle. Okay, then we have what's known as skew left and skew right. Skew left, most of our data is actually to the right. What the skew is referring to, the skew is referring to the dead part. I shouldn't say dead part, but there's not a whole lot of data. Okay, so it's backwards of what you would normally think. Skew right then, most of my data falls towards the lower end. This one's always harder for me to draw. Okay, so our distribution, this is all based on shape. So is it a normal distribution? Is it skew left? Is it skew right? That's what the shape is referring to. Then we have what are called outliers. Outliers are data points that may skew the data left or right. Okay, so points that skew the data. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's say, for instance, I have time in seconds to run a 100 meter. Okay, so I have a list of times, 11, 12, 13, actually, let me reset this. I'm going to just give you a tally. I think it'd be easier with our frequency. So for instance, let's say that I had 3 people run it in 10 seconds, 12 people run it in 11, 8 people at 12, 1 person at 13, 1 person at 14, and then I had 1 person run it at 23. Well, looking at this, if I were to truly make a histogram of this data here, I'd have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So 10, I'm actually going to go by 2s. So there's my 12. Looking at this histogram, it's gonna be a little goofy here. And then all of a sudden over here, I've got one person that ran it. Okay, so looking at this, just so you can see what we're talking about, I've got one person clear out there. Well, this is going to have to be an outlier. Okay, something must have gone wrong that this person ran their 123 when everything else is so congested, to say the least, between 14 and 10. Okay, so this right here would be an outlier. Okay, so if I were to take that data point out, right now, let me rephrase that. Right now, with that data point in there, we are skew right. Okay, but if I were to take that out of there, and I'm looking at just the 10 to 14 range, I have a normal distribution. Okay, it's somewhat normal. But because that outlier is in there, it's skew right. Okay, so for instance, I'm going to give you another set here. I'm going to give you some data. You guys are going to figure out if there are any outliers. So for your data set, these are quiz scores. So what I would do is I would go through and make a histogram and kind of figure out, okay, what's this going to look like? Are there any outliers? What's the shape? That's what I'm asking you. Now, something some people may notice is that this information could change based on your intervals. Whether or not you had an interval that's from 5s or 10s or whatever it is, that could change. But I just want you to think about, okay, are there actually outliers and what is the shape? Looking at the quiz scores here, I'm going to set up my histogram. And some of you might have already noticed this, just looking at it. What's the data that doesn't fit? Yes, there is an outlier, and it is 40. But I still need to figure out what the shape is. So I'm going to use my histogram then to calculate my shape. So with that being said, I'm going to use intervals of 10. So besides the 40, I'm at 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s. So we've got 1 in the 40s, 3 in the 70s, 4 in the 80s, 5 in the 90s, and 2 in the 100s. All right, so looking at this, here's my 40s, and I've got 1 there. 70s, I've got 3. 80s, 4. 90s, 5. And 100s, 2. So looking at this, this is how I find my shape. I'm just going down the dots here. Looking at this, I don't necessarily really have a true shape, but because of that outlier, I'm going to say this is skew left. If that outlier wasn't there, if my outlier wasn't there, I would still say it's skew left just because of where I'm starting.